Welcome to Delphicon 2023. We're celebrating 28 great years of Delphi. My name is Holger Flick, and in the next 45 minutes, I'm going to show you how you can visualize data on a map. And we're going to use two key products to make this happen. First, FireDAC, the database framework that comes bundled with Delphi, and second, TMS FNC Maps. FNC implies that it is a cross-platform framework that you can use in the VCL, FireMonkey, and the web with TMS Web Core. And it is also cross-service, meaning that you can use various mapping services as well. You're not restricted to Google or Bing. There's many others. Here's the agenda for today. First, I'm starting with a use case to motivate the whole session. Examples work best. We learn best if we have an example to look at and to remember if we want to recall how something works. Then I'm going to give you precise steps how to visualize data on maps. And in order to do that, I need to introduce the mapping framework, TMS FNC Maps. And then I'm going to show the example step by step. At that point, I'll also focus on the FireDAC parts, how to connect to the database, how to query information from a database, how to find the database on your disk. And as you might have figured as I was talking about file names, we are going to use a local SQLite database in this example. Also meaning that you can download the example source code after watching the session and reproduce the example for yourself. And even for the product like TMS FNC Maps, there's a trial version available that you can try everything out. As a use case, I downloaded a database of all the cell towers in the United States. Yes, really, something like this exists in the United States. There's this open data policy in many states and also on the federal level. So I am able to create a SQL database from this information. You can find it yourself at the source given on this slide. I am not allowed to give you the whole database as is. You can download the comma-separated file yourself and convert it into the database easily. Then you're able to reproduce the example. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show the position of all the cell towers in a certain way. Let me show you. This is the example we're going to build. We're going to use the Open Layers map. Open Layers has the advantage you don't need a subscription. You won't need an API key to access the map. You can use it right away. I will also show you how you can use other mapping providers like Google, for example. However, the clustering is only supported with Open Layers and Google. And for Google, you need to sign up with a Google account and request a Google Maps API key. And just as a hint, a certain amount of requests is free, but at some point Google will ask you to pay for the service. So please be very careful to read the conditions first before you start tinkering with your own examples using Google Maps. The user interaction of this application is very straightforward. This is Alaska, and I can now choose a different state. For example, I can choose Connecticut, and then here we have all the cell towers in Connecticut. But the cool thing is the clustering is interactive. Like now, for example, we see that here around New Haven, we've got 26 cell towers. And if I zoom in, I see how these 26 cell towers distribute on the area that was not visible before because that was zoomed out. As soon as I zoom in, I get more and more detail where those cell towers are. This is a pretty cool example. And if you see how easy it will be to build, you'll be amazed. So let's start with the theoretical stuff on the slides first, though. Technology we need. First, we need, of course, Delphi. I use either the VCL or FireMonkey. As I said, the mapping framework and FireDAC are available for both. I built a VCL application in this case. We will use FireDAC to access a SQLite database, and we will use Open Layers because there's no need for an access key and the API is free to use. The final technology part you need to learn how to use markers and then how to tell the mapping framework to cluster those markers on a map. A marker is, just to get the terminology straight, is nothing but a position latitude, longitude on a map. That's it. That's what a marker is. So let's look at FNC Maps first, the technology of mapping at your fingertips. So FNC mapping is cross-framework, cross-platform, cross-service. Cross-framework means you can drop these components either on a VCL form, FireMonkey form, or on a web form for a TMS web core. So that way you can write applications for Windows, macOS, Android, iOS, Linux, and even the Raspberry Pi. Available services right now are Google Maps, Apple, MapKit, TomTom, Microsoft Bing, Here, Microsoft Azure, Mapbox, and OpenLayers, the example that we're going to use today. As it is with cross applications, there are some restrictions because some features are available for all services and some features are only available for some of the services. One of these examples is clustering. Clustering, as I just told you, is only available for OpenLayers in Google. And with regards to object-oriented programming, that means you have one base control, the TMS FNC Maps control, that offers a map for all different kinds of services. You simply switch a property and then you select the service you want to use. And then it's the same for each service. So your user can actually switch dynamically at runtime between the different maps, but your code stays the same. You can add lines, polygons, polylines, circles, rectangles. You can add a marker location. You can zoom, pan, center the map. You can even do complex tasks like import multiple markers or routes using GPX and GeoJSONs. And then there are dozens of events that allow you to interact with the map, meaning if the user clicks on a certain location, you can query that location in an event. And as said, some services have individual components to support special features this mapping service offers. And then there's also components for special features. For example, routing has TTMS FNC directions. You can calculate alternative routes. You can access each item of the turn-by-turn instructions that the mapping service generates. Of course, the level of detail depends on the mapping service that you use. Geocoding, normal and reverse, meaning you enter coordinates and you get the address, or you enter an address and you get the coordinates. Both operations are supported. And of course, you can ask for the current location. There's a component for that as well. And with regards to directions, these also are available on the mapping component now. You don't need to add a separate component anymore in later versions of TMS FNC Maps. Specific functionality is available for Google. You can import KML files. These are files with certain layers. You can offer user interactions with shapes and markers, meaning your users will literally be able to draw on a map. You can display traffic information, the aforementioned clustering, and you can offer theming, night, day. These are the two defaults, but you can load any custom theme that you can create with the Google specific theme designer. This image shows a KML layout of the initial 13 colonies before the United States were founded. Just one example for a KML file that was imported as a layer on top of an existing map. Then this shows how you can offer user interaction. This is a circle, and on this circle you see all the different hooks where the user can drag the circle to make it bigger and smaller, and also to move the circle itself by moving the center. Here's another clustering example taken from my book. I'll link you to that later on. But as we have clustering here, I'm not going to go into that in more detail. This is a theme. This, for example, shows how you can make your map black and white using the black map theme. You'll simply download this JSON file that you see right here and assign that to the property, and the theme will be applied. Really, really easy. And last but not least, in the last couple of months, TMS added more specific components for Mapbox, TomTom to support their special map types, and OpenLayers offers service selection for your as your map server where the map pieces are being retrieved, and here has truck specific routing instructions, so you can generate routes that are specific for logistic purposes. That was already all the theory I wanted to do today. Isn't that great? I mean, now it's all just Delphi. With regards to FireDAC, it's pre-configured in all editions of Delphi, and the best about today's example is I'm not going to use any server-related databases, so you can use this with any edition of Delphi because it's a local database. FireDAC comes here, FireDAC category with all different components there. We are only going to use two of those. We're going to use the connection and we're going to use a query to extract data from the database. And then we are also only going to use one component here, the TMS FNC Open Layers component, which offers the map for us. Just as a tiny derivation from the actual topic, let me show you how TMS FNC Maps works. You drop the Maps component on the form, the FNC Maps component right here, and you see there's a Google Maps, Bing Maps for specific use cases. So we drop the component right here, and you might think like, why isn't there any content inside? Well, by default, the map component is set to Google right here. So the service property of the mapping component is set to Google. We don't have a Google Maps API key. There's a property right here, API key. That's where you can enter your key that you retrieve from Google. And if you were to enter that key here, your map would immediately appear. In this case, I'm going to set it to service and then open layers. But you also see how easy it is to switch to all the different mapping services. If I set it to open layers, the map appears, but nobody keeps me from writing in my code. Let me just go into the onCreate event of the form to write some code. Let's rename this one into map2 because there's a second map here. Map2 dot service, and now I could set it to a different one, MS, and then I could say switch to here, for example. That's how easy it is to switch the service at runtime. Really, really easy. Of course, if you switch to a service that requires an API key, first you have to set the API key string property as well. But that's really, really easy. All other functionality is available using methods and events. For example, if we want to set a different center coordinate, you can use set center. If you want to set the zoom level, you can use set zoom level. Everything the user can do with the mouse interactively is also available in code. That's what makes this framework or this class or this component pack, however you want to refer to it, so great. One more thing, the events. There are many, many events that make working with this framework bliss. For example, you can use onClick in order to find out if somebody clicked on a map. You might think that is the standard onClick event. If you want to have the additional information where the user clicked on the map, you can use onMapClick or onMapDoubleClick. That event contains in the parameter aEventData the coordinate where the user clicked. That's how easy it is. You don't even need to do any math or anything. You can immediately get the coordinate where the user clicked. It's great, isn't it? And there's many, many more events that allow you to interact with the user. For example, onMarkerClick is being triggered when a user clicks on a marker that is visible on a map, for example. And it also, of course, gives you a reference to the marker that has been clicked. So in aEventData, I'm quite certain right here, marker refers to the marker that has been clicked. That just as a brief introduction, because we're using here not the standard component, we're using here the open layers component, meaning we don't have a service property because this is always going to be open layers and not anything where we can configure which service we want to use. We always will use open layers. That is the only restriction you encounter if you want to use special functionality that's only available with a certain mapping provider. You can't switch. You can't switch to, for example, Bing if you want to use the clustering from Google. You then have to use the Google component that supports the clustering. The next step is the database. I told you I downloaded the CSV file, the comma separated file from the internet, and simply converted it into a SQLite database. There's great tools or scripts, Python scripts out there that allow you to convert CSV into SQLite easily. One of those tools is called CSVS to SQLite. It allows you to simply, if I invoke it right here, it allows you to specify paths of different CSV files, and then you specify the database name as the last parameter, and it will convert all those CSV files into a database. The cool thing is you can even automatically create foreign key constraints, handling of date and time values, all those things, different separators, quoting of strings, everything is included in this script. I said it's called CSV to SQLite. You'll find it on the internet easily. I also recommend when working with SQLite to download SQLite Studio. It's free and it gives great access to SQLite databases. So the database that we're going to use, I called it cellulartowers.sqlite. The database contains only one table. In my case, I called it Cellular Towers. The reason for that is I used the script, and the script creates the table with the same name as the CSV file. The CSV file was called Cellular Towers. And there's lots and lots of attributes, as you can see here. Also mind that we have decimal values designated with real, integer, and text. There is no further type definition for this database if we use the CSV tool. That might be a little bit of a struggle at first because by default FireDAC transfers text into memo. That might be a little bit difficult at first. We'll look at how I handle that in the example next. But by default, text might be interpreted as a memo field. We're not using these for this example other than for the state right here. So it was a pretty easy thing to use. However, long term, you need to basically be aware that your table structure is written with FireDAC in mind because, as we all know, SQLite doesn't have strict typing. That's one of the, some people say, whoa, it's a great feature of SQLite. Some people say it's not a great feature because you don't have strict typing with SQLite. I didn't even bother to define a primary key or anything like that. I just took the data as is. If we look at the data itself, X, Y, whatever it is, we have the licensee company, we have a call sign, and then it gets interesting. We get like the location in different units. And the unit that we need is after the specification of a description that is understandable for us. There's a city, county, state, and then here we get the latitude, decimal, the decimal latitude value, and the decimal longitude value. That's the one we need, or those are the two we need in order to put a marker on the map. We're also going to filter. That is also important. Like there is so many cell towers in the US. If you were to add all of them on the whole map, total rows loaded is 47,329. If you put that many markers on a map, it is going to work. But as soon as you scroll and zoom in, you are going to see a performance hit. So it doesn't make any sense to display them all at the same time. You're also going to overburden your audience. So in this case, in my opinion, it makes sense to filter by state. Because there's 50 states in the United States, it kind of makes sense to divide the whole data set into 50. I know that there's some states that are bigger than others. However, if the states are bigger, they don't have more cell towers necessarily. Like if you think of states like New York, which are heavily populated in certain centers, they might, even though they're smaller than, for example, Connecticut or Massachusetts, they might still have significantly more cell towers. So it's not that easy. So using the state as a criterion is pretty good. If it's still not working for you, you can also do state and county with this database. For example, you can even go down to the city level if you wanted to expand on this example here. So going back to Delphi, how do we get this database into our IDE? First of all, be sure that you have SQLite3.dll in your path somewhere so that the IDE can access it. I never have a problem finding this library because there's simply so many applications that come with it. For example, Heidi SQL comes nowadays also with SQLite. You can simply check this by looking for SQLite3.dll, and you see all the different installations of this, and then you find Heidi SQL. Heidi SQL, just be careful. It might not be, it is here. If it is the 32-bit application, you also need the 32-bit DLL for Delphi. So I simply copy the SQLite3 DLL into my binary directory of Delphi, and that's it. That way I never have to worry about Delphi being able to access the SQLite database. Same goes if you deploy your application, you have to put that into your application directory. Then to the connection itself, you drop the TFD connection on the form. And the first thing I always do, I disable the login prompt. It doesn't make any sense for the database to prompt us. And of course, connected stored usage allows us to transfer the connection state of the connection to runtime, meaning if you set it to true, that the connection is true at design time, the first thing Delphi does when it runs the application is going to connect to the database. Does not make any sense to me, so I disable them both. If you want to work with your database at design time, double click, and then simply set the name of the database in here. So I still have an old name in here. So we can simply say FNC Maps, clustering. I have here the DB directory. And then the SQLite ending is in there. So here we have Cellular Tower SQLite open. It doesn't matter what the file is called. And that is all I set. The locking mode, I always set that to normal. And then I also disable the journal mode. I don't want to keep the database to keep track of the changes I make. So that's that. By the way, here you can also set the string format if it's supposed to be ANSI or Unicode by default. All these things are a date type format because I just told you there are no strict types. So that might be something very interesting for you to look into. Okay, no username, password needed. Okay, and that's that. If we now go to the query component, double click here, and let's start with the states. I have simply a select distinct, log state 1, 2. Why do I do that? If I just select the log state, let's do that. That's exactly what I just explained to you with regards to the data type. We get a white memo because by default, FireDAC interprets text as memo field. In order to circumvent that, I simply tell the database server, interpret it as a string and take substring from position 1, 2. That's the state from cellular towers, and then order by that. And distinct means do not list state twice. And here we go. And that's exactly the list I have. Obviously, this trick is not as good if you really have lots and lots of data and strings. You might have to change the structure of your table by changing it to a data type, or you might have to change the FireDAC behavior, telling it to use string for text instead of memo. There's plenty of documentation on that from Embarcadero on the doc wiki. So with that, that's the first query. How did I link the query? So the TFD query has a connection property right here that links the query to the connection. And you simply can double click it, and you get this wonderful view, enter your query, click execute, and then you get the result of your query right here at design time, if your database is accessible at design time. That does not solve the problem, however, if we run our application, that the database is being found, right? Usually you, for example, in this case, I have my binary directory with the clustering open maps example, and then the DB folder with the database. So the binary directory, here my application has to go up one directory and then dive down into the DB directory and find this database. Thankfully, FireDAC makes it really, really easy for us. If we look at the source code right here, I have a method which I call initConnection. I call it when I create my form, and I set the connection params.database, which is the database name in case of a SQLite database, not only to Cellular Towers SQLite, which is the file name. No, I have this wonderful placeholder that FireDAC comes with, $run, and that will be replaced by FireDAC with the application directory. Neat, huh? Of course, if you have one of the newer Delphi versions, you can also use IO utils and then combine the path with the file name, because we have tpath get library path, that's the application, comma, then you can add this letter part, this here, and then use tpath.combine, like here, path first and second path. However, it's much, much easier just using this run placeholder. FireDAC does the rest for us. That's it. That's all we need to basically make sure that the database is being found. Of course, you could do if file not found. What will happen if the database doesn't exist? Well, simple. FireDAC will create it. You won't have any records, so the list of states will be empty. The user can't select anything. The only thing that will happen, the map will be shown. Nothing else. To populate the states, we use a simple tcombo box. And when we create the form, I also call initStates. And it's kept really, really simple. I open the query with the states. I tell the combo box I want to update. Make sure you call endUpdate and queueStates close. And the finally clause of your database, and the finally clause of your construct. And then we clear all the elements that exist in the combo box and then add all the different states into the combo box. That's it. By default, I assume, of course, that I have at least one record at this stage. I set it to 0, and that means the first item in the combo box is being selected. At this point, we have all the states inside of the combo box. However, we need to be able to select a state and then run a second query which yields all the different towers for that state. And that's what we see here in this query that is a little bit more complicated, but not that complicated really. We select a couple of attributes like object ID, licensee, call sign. For this example, I really only need latitude and longitude, latdec and longdec, which I renamed to lat long using aliases in my query statement. I also select the state again. And I select from Cellular Towers, that's the name of the table. And this is the key point here, where log state equals to state. This is a parameter, that's why we use a colon in front. If we go to parameters, FireDAC even shows us this. Now I can, for example, say value MA. It's an input param type. I set it to input, data type is string. MA is Massachusetts, so execute. And there we have all the different cell towers in Massachusetts. Of course, licensee, call sign, white memo, because I didn't change the configuration of FireDAC. I don't use these here in this case, so I leave it as is, as memo fields. Of course, if you use .sstring with field by name, you can access them like any other field. It's just a little bit cumbersome if you see them in a grid. And with that, we have all the ingredients to implement the filter. In the event on click, meaning when the state is selected, we call add towers for state, current state. State as in state of the United States, not state as in status. And current state, what is that? that is a property which only has a read method implemented and get current state, returns the name of the state that is selected inside of the combo box. If there is no selection being made, it simply returns an empty string. So if we go back to the event right here, we call add towers for state with the state that has been selected. So, and in this method, I need to do two things. I need to set the parameter in the query, I need to execute the query, and then I need to update the map. Those are the big things that I need to do. In order to set the parameter state in my SQL query, I call qtowers, param by name state, string is the state that I passed here into the method, and then I open the query. And at that point, my qtowers query contains all the records that match the state that has been selected. And then the most important call here is map.beginUpdate. Why is it so important? If you forget it, after adding one marker, the map is being updated. You add another marker, the map is being updated again and again and again and again. So that can take a long time when you add like a couple of hundred markers. So you want to call begin update. No refresh is being done until you call end update, and that way you have a very, very quick adding of markers to your map. With map clear, I clear all the existing markers. Let me see, map is the map component, and then here clear. I can select what I want to clear. I could also say clear markers by not clearing any of the other elements, but I call clear to clear anything that is on the map, drawn on the map. And let's ignore this for a change. The next line, we ignore it first. So we iterate all the different records in our query. And for each record, we create a marker. How do we create a marker? We call map.addMarker. And in there, we specify a coordinate or latitude and longitude. Coordinate is a special data type or record from TMS FNC Maps. We don't need that. We just specify the latitude as a double and the longitude as a double. And we can also specify a title if we want to, and even an URL for the icon to use for the marker. So if you don't want to use this default marker that the framework offers. So in this case, we add the marker to the latitude and longitude data that is in the fields lat and long that we get from the query. Also, in order to enable the clustering, we create one cluster, only one, of this data type here, TMS FNC Open Layers cluster, and assign that cluster to each of the markers that we add to the map. That's it. One cluster, multiple markers. The markers have the type TTMS FNC Open Layers marker. You might wonder if you've seen something from FNC Maps before. There's also the TTMS FNC Maps marker. Yes, indeed, it exists. That is the marker that is for all the services, not a specific marker. This is a marker class that is specific for open layers. There's also a specific class for Google Maps that supports the clustering for each of the services. That's the difference here. And with that, believe it or not, we already added all the different markers to the map. Let me comment out the next line. I want to focus on that next. So we run it as is. And again, Alaska is the first, but the map is on the default position. This is the default position of the map, which is New York. So if I zoom out and scroll, the markers have been added, but this is not very comfortable, is it? Like I have to move over, zoom out. So it would be great if I had something to focus on the area that concerns me. And that's exactly what this zoom to bounds does. I can specify bounds, meaning a rectangle, top left, bottom right, kind of like a rect in the VCL, that I want to zoom in. And then the mapping framework does all the work for me. I just specify where I want to focus on. And that is very, very easy because the markers of the map, which is a property dot has a method to coordinate array, meaning it returns an array that contains all the coordinates of all the markers that are dropped on the map. And the cool thing is that this zoom to bounds has an overload that accepts exactly an array as this. So that way you can very, very easily zoom in onto an area that you add markers to. So we add this zoom to bounds with the coordinate array. When we run it again now, the zooming is automatic to what we select. So we select a different state, for example, Colorado, and here are all the cell towers in Colorado. And if you now zoom in on the Denver area, you see the farther I zoom in, the more cell towers appear. It's pretty neat. And if I select a different state, for example, Georgia, you see all the different cell towers in Georgia with clustering enabled. And you see it's also very, very quick performance-wise. I'm quite sure you could display multiple states, but all the states is a little bit tricky considering how many cell towers there are. One final thing I haven't explained to you yet. How did I get the filter up here in the title bar of my form? Well, Delphi turns 28 today, so guess what? It's one of the newer components. It's the T title bar panel, and you can drop your controls into this T title bar panel, and that way the control is not inside of the form, but inside of your title bar, as you see it right here. This is a pretty new component. It was introduced in one of the more recent releases of Delphi. It's one of the great examples that the VCL is constantly being modernized so that you can use features. I mean, Delphi uses it itself right here, I assume, and that way you can use features that Microsoft uses in their new Office applications very, very easily. It's just a component that you drop on the form, T title bar panel, right here in the Windows 10 section, so I assume it's compatible with Windows 10 as well, not only Windows 11. Remember, I always confuse the two. Windows 7 is not Windows 10, so Windows 10 is required. Windows 7 is no longer supported if you wanted to use this component. So that's already all there is to say about this example. It shows the power of FireDAC, how easy it is to connect to SQLite databases and to incorporate it into your Delphi applications. And even more so, FNC Maps makes it very easy to interact with maps from quite a few service providers on multiple platforms, and also to draw on the map is very, very easy. Just a few lines of code and you can add results from your database queries and present them on a map that gives your users the experience to immediately understand the data that is in your databases. If you would like to learn more about FNC Maps, here's a book hint for you. I wrote a book about FNC Maps that gives you all the different components that FNC Maps has to offer and goes into detail with all the data types, all the different components available, and all the different additional functionality like geocoding, routing, and always with a great example that you can remember how to use these things. So this is book 2 of the hands-on series. I would love if you had a look at number 1 and 3 as well. Maybe there is a topic in there that interests you as well. You find these books on FlixEngineering.com/books. They're exclusive to Amazon in paperback, so you can pick the Amazon store that's closest to you and you'll get your own copy. For more interaction and ability to answer questions, there's How It Works with Holger, a new live stream on YouTube. I will always present a 20-30-minute topic to you and you'll have the ability to ask questions. The link is a little bit long. Just look for How It Works with Holger live on YouTube. I'll also keep you posted on my webpage about upcoming dates this broadcast happens. It is always on every week or bi-weekly. That's at least what I hope it will be. And I'll try to answer all the questions that you might have that might come up during the broadcast. And I'll also hint to upcoming Delphi events that might be also of interest to you. With regards to TMS software, if you want to learn more about FNC or other products from TMS, go to fnc.tmssoftware.com. We're ready for Q&A now. Usually you'll get me, but Delphi's birthday also coincides with Valentine's Day, and as I'm married, you know the story. I'm on vacation today, so I had to look for somebody to take over, and I found a great replacement because Bruno Ferenc from TMS is even more suited to answer all the questions you might have about FNC Maps, FireDAC, and this example in particular. He is aware of the demo, of course. We looked at this demonstration together, so I'm quite certain he will be able to answer all the questions that you might have, and maybe even more, give you more insights into some other TMS products he has in the works. So here we go. Say hi to Bruno, and thanks for the interest. And I'll see you soon, maybe even at a How It Works with Holger Live.
How unfortunate that actually Bruno can't be here either. One of the joys of pre-recording, Adrian.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Bruno is also away. I think he's on holiday somewhere. He did mention where he was gone. Holger's traveling as well, so he's doubly unavailable. Jim and I are here to fill in a bit of time. As it happens, I've volunteered to TMS to answer some questions. I use TMS components a lot, and I'm a good friend of Holger, and I even have, I don't know whether it will show up, if I do that, I think it will show up. I even have his book there. No, it doesn't work. It goes invisible, but you get the general gist of it. There's a book there. It's an invisible book now. So I start some of the questions. How long do we have?
So there's a question here, or comment actually, from Raphael saying TMS cross-platform components are great. Yeah, I'm a big fan of everything TMS has. If you're not, you don't need to use everything TMS makes, but by all means, go out and be familiar with what they have, because you may be like in desperate need of one of their components. That's one of the things.
They're just so annoyingly useful. There's something for everyone there, and I make the mistake of going, I'll just install this set and I'll install that set, and then my IDE goes like that when it starts up. I have a whole stream of things load in, but they're all access subscription, which basically gives you everything. It's like going to a cake shop, because once you're there, you think, I'll have this one as well, and then I'll use this one. But yeah, their stuff's good. I mean, there are other people around the component vendors. I don't want to show too much favor in one direction or another, but as I've said before, as soon as TMS stop writing good components, I'll stop talking about them. It's one of those things. And as Sergio says, oops, I clicked the wrong one there.
Actually, I clicked that one. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was just going to say, Sergio says TMS strikes again. Yes, they do. They're very, very prolific, and they've got an awful lot of stuff. So you were going to say about Lars's comment.
Yeah, so Lars, I'm looking into it right now. Ian pointed me in the right direction. I think I've almost got it fixed. I think I found the problem. I found where the feeds are, Ian. I'll get it.
Oh, cool.
I'll get it fixed.
Yeah.
It should be fixed here shortly.
Yeah, I mean, we did turn one off before, but it's to do with the timeout. It's very complicated, annoying stuff. So,
how Lars says he loves TMS's VCL UI pack.
Yeah, the FNC UI pack and the VCL UI pack have got different capabilities. The idea behind the FNC, which I think Holger did mention, is that it's cross-platform. So it will work on Windows, it will work as FMX, it will work on TMS Web Core, which is obviously their web target, and unfortunately I've forgotten their little cross-platform Electron competitor, but it will work on WX, I think, or something like that. But it works on that as well. So FNC is great. There are some differences between the components, and you lose some functionality because it's obviously doing the thing that FireMonkey does, which is compromise for different platforms.
It does give you some flexibility, though, that you can work around handling that and making it more resilient.
I'm involved in a very big project at the moment that is using TMS Web Core, and we chose to use the FNC components on there as well because they did actually give functionality that we couldn't get in other ways. It's like some panels and stuff that are quite useful. Someone said, which calls are they sending to Maps and which are they handling? The reason that was raised by Andrew was there is a charge for Google Maps. Actually, there's a free tier, and then there's a chargeable tier once you exceed the it's kind of a freemium model. You know how these things go. And the concern there was what happens if you TMS Miletus, yes. What happens if you go over the free tier? Because if there's lots of calls going backwards and forwards, then there's a concern that they'll do that. I can't answer that, and I'm pretty certain Jim can't answer that. So actually, Bruno, who would be here, would probably be able to answer it. But Bruno has said if you've got any questions, then to email him directly, and he will try and answer them. His email is help@tmssoftware.com. I'm not so sure Holger would appreciate emails directly about these questions. You never know, but it's always one.
He probably will be able to help you too. And Holger does have his books on the topic as well, which
he does, and also his little thing that he mentioned, the how it works with Holger Live, which is on Holger's website, which is FlixEngineering.com. If you go there to his blog, he's got a link to his new How It Works series. Holger is another guy who is going to be doing a lot of live streaming of code. Patrick Prematin, who many of you will see in YouTube answering questions. Patrick does a lot of live streaming. He's a very prolific streamer. And I admire them for doing it live because, you know, as we know from this morning's start, when things are live, anything can happen, and it usually does. So live streaming of code is very brave and also very useful to people because you can ask questions whilst they're live and interact with them. And I think that's extremely useful. I'm not so brave to do that. I prefer to pre-record my stuff.
One of the advantages of doing things live is that when you're seeing pre-recorded presentations, pre-recorded demos, you get this impression that we're magic and we just wave our fingers over the keyboard and magic rolls out and the code works right the first time. Never happens.
Yeah, I always say to people, I'm just a regular guy. You know, I get up and I write code every day. I'm no more special than anybody else. The difference is that I don't have a problem appearing on camera and writing about it. You know, I've got skill with writing, but that's about it. I don't consider myself. There are plenty of much better programmers out there, and I think with the live streaming people, they're really putting, you know, holding their flag up and saying, "Here's what I can do," and I you know, I admire everything they're doing there. I really respect them for that. And Patrick and Holger, the two that immediately come to mind for being people that stream live.
It's great just to get a chance to see the errors that are being made, because it's all errors. It's all you're writing code and you're reading the code you just wrote and realize that's not what I wanted to write, and fixing it.
Yeah, and also humanity. You know, if they make a mistake, it's the humanness and go, oh, I make mistakes like that I'm not that weird or I'm not that useless. You know, Jim and I have talked about this before, but it's a very common thing, even with the highest echelons of Microsoft developers and things like that. Some of the most famous faces in the world, they suffer from imposter syndrome the same as everybody else. You know, Jim and I talk about these things, and both of us have been developers for a very long time. And there are occasions where you watch someone doing something on a stream and you just think, I know absolutely nothing. How have I got away with it for so many years? And the reality is that actually everybody's like that, you know, and being able to see people program live and occasionally make mistakes is natural. That, you know, not everybody knows everything. Most good senior developers are just very good at Googling and finding the right answer. They have no memory. It's all shot to pieces. What was the other? There was another question. Oh, yes, the one question that did get asked, and I don't know whether I starred it, but I really wanted to pick up on it. Let me just see if I can find it. I can't find it right now, but it was about geofencing.
Oh, okay. I saw the geofencing one. So I believe there's geofencing. Is there support for geofencing related functions decided if you're inside or outside of a region? I believe that's built into the location components. It's not in the map components, but the
correct.
location components.
someone's misunderstanding what geofencing does. Unfortunately, there is a Google API for geofencing, and you have to subscribe to it. And surprise, surprise, there's an awful lot of information that allows them to track back to see who you are, because obviously geofencing is also a form of, it could be a form of stalking or spying if you want to see where someone's going and what they're up to. You can see how that could be abused if people wanted to, if there was no way of notifying the user that they were being geofenced. I forget what the app is called. I'm just going to open my phone and just have a look. Life 360 is one of these mapping apps where you can actually say, let me know if my daughter leaves college, for example, when I'm expecting her to go home and there's some bad traffic, or God forbid there's been a shooting or something like that. But that is entirely to do with location based, and it's to do with the device itself, not really a mapping function. I know it works with mapping, but it's not that. It's a different API. So that's an answer to that. How we do it. We've got loads of time. Yeah. Lots
of comments about how great TMS is, and I do want to address one comment here that I hear this one a lot. Why doesn't Embarcadero just buy TMS integrated with Delphi? So it's an interesting thing, and there's been a couple times in the past where this has happened in other smaller scales, and I'm going to explain why I think this is a bad idea. Because everybody probably could use TMS. TMS's components are great, but having them separate gives you that flexibility, right, to decide what you want to use and such. And also, it lets TMS kind of have their own focus on what they're doing and create this great value add for developers. So, I get that you would like to see it free in the box with Delphi. I love free, as Ian said earlier. Free is the best price. Yeah, but absolutely. At the end of the day, there's a cost involved, right? And so if Embarcadero bought it, we'd have to raise the price of Delphi for everybody, because we'd have to continue to pay to keep improving TMS.
And there's a lot of people behind those components, and there's some complicated relationships, I'm sure, with TMS with those components, because not all of them, I'm sure, are directly written by people that actually work in a TMS office. I'm sure that. And also there would be a few other difficulties, because Dev Express, for example, Wall to Wall, and a few of the others would say, well, hang on a minute, what are you doing giving away things that compete directly with their business model? And it's a tricky thing.
It's been a tricky thing. I remember years ago, I was at a tech partner event at I think it was Borland. Yeah, I was back at Borland. And there was a discussion about some new components that are coming out being integrated into Delphi. And there were some concerns from some tech partners, like, we make components that compete with the ones you're about to include, exactly like Ian was saying. And the decision was made that those components needed to be included because they are kind of fundamental to the Windows support tier, that they try to have a certain level of support built into the box. But really, I think the beauty of Delphi is the community and the ability to go grab that particular set of components that you need and add it in. And
an example of this, though, would be FireDAC, because FireDAC is a whole range of components allowing you to access various servers, and yet there's still MyDAC and AnyDAC and all those other types of technology for accessing databases. Just because it's built in and comes as part of the system doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't have some form of competition that's a third-party competition. So, there's a pros and cons, but I think TMS being independent as they are at the moment is probably a good thing as well.
Now, if someone decides to buy them, that's fine. I'm just saying there are pros and cons. It's not a simple thing. Roland pointed out that TMS, if you do buy their subscription, it's not that expensive. Renewals have a huge discount. Was it Ian? Was it you that said the thing about buying components? If it saves you a little bit of time, it totally pays.
Yes, I mean, it depends how much you charge out your daily rate, or if you don't charge out your daily rate. But if you look at a subscription for TMS, I think it's like $800 or something like that for everything, for the renewal. I could be getting it wrong, but it sounds a lot, but it's not a massive amount of money. if you have got this kind of functionality, let's say a grid, okay, you could spend, or I'll tell you, a planner component. They have a really good planner component. Okay, you could write one, and in fact, I've written a planner component because obviously I write time and attendance and human resources, and planners come up quite a lot. You could spend 3-4 days writing that component and go, ha! I pay myself not a lot, therefore I've saved some money. But then you spend the next 6 months every so often with a bug coming up that actually you've broken something, you did something wrong, it's not flexible enough, there's this and this and this. By the time you finished, you may as well have outlaid the money on the components and get all those other components as well. Why do it yourself and reinventing the wheel and writing some new code? And we all know that new code has definitely got a lot of bugs in it, that no matter how good you are, you will put something in there that you won't have gone through and engineered out all of the problems unless you're very, very lucky. And I don't believe it for a second. 30 odd years in the software development industry, I know that thing doesn't exist. But you know, going and spending some money on components is actually an investment that's worthwhile. It's the same. Someone was asking, you know, we get people saying, why can't Rad Studio be free? And things like that. Again, it's the same thing. I understand that for some people, the price of things like Rad Studio can be expensive. But let's look at you as a delivery driver, where you've got a truck and you are, I don't know, removals company where you're moving people around. You've got to pay for that truck, even if you rent it. You've got to pay for the guys or the women that jump in the back and move the furniture around. You've got to pay for the straps and the boxes. You've got to pay for your insurance. You've got to pay for your license. There is a cost involved in doing business. If you're a professional developer, the cost of things like components and the cost of things like Rad Studio and whatever your tools are really, I know it's not cheap. I appreciate that. But at the end of the day, you have to factor it into the business. If you're only earning a very small amount of money, that's why the community edition exists, because fair's fair. You're not going to make a lot of money out of it. Therefore, you can't factor in the cost. I also appreciate that some people live in, you know, some countries that are third world, as they used to be called, or countries with a weaker economy where the cost of living is much lower, but the cost of acquiring things like Rad Studio might be higher. But you know, what can we do? It's not a fair world, unfortunately. That's how it works. But the cost of components, the cost of Rad Studio, come on, you know, they're tools of the trade. You got to stop thinking of them as an expense and say, I'm buying the best tools I can, and it saves me having to sand down a piece of wood with a piece of leather. I'm actually going to use an electric sander to do the job in 10 minutes rather than 15 hours of doing by hand. So yeah, it's good. Okay, I think we're near it. We've got 2 minutes left, Jim. What else?
There's a few comments here about feature requests or bug reports. Please go to quality.embarcadero.com and submit them there. That's the process I would do. If you're posting your things here, I would have to go at it, and then they would come back and ask me a question. I'd be like, I don't know. Somebody else suggested it. So go and add it, follow up on it. It might, I know they don't always get fixed right away. I know they don't always get added right away, but that's the best process for it, is add them there, follow up. If a comment's posted, if there's requests for more information, follow up on it. And it's important to mention as well that Embarcadero is actually quite responsive to these things. It can take time to engineer them. There's a lot of procedures to go through because, you may see the IDE in English, but it also goes out in Japanese and German. And all. Some changes are bigger behind the scenes than you would think they might be. Oh, it's just changing this dialogue. But actually, there's an awful lot that goes on behind that in QA and the engineering to do it in the first place and committing it to a particular release. So it's not, I know it looks simple sometimes, but as developers, you should know that there's no such thing as a simple fix. It just doesn't exist. We are out of time, and we have our bonus session coming up here.
Woo!
A new session that was added here is JavaScript the Delphi way with John Assedin. Yes,
cool.
I think that's, yeah. And he said he's going to try and be on for Q&A. He's in Norway, so it's middle of the night for him, but he's going to try and be on anyway. And this should be really exciting. I'm excited to see it. This is the release of his Cortex Studio, which is written in Delphi, which is a Object Pascal to JavaScript transpiler. Very cool stuff. It's written in Delphi, like I said. Let's see, Glenn just had a here about this as well. It said, for bug filing quality portal, please be detailed to provide as much data as possible. There's a blog article about how to write good bug report. Yes, a bonus session, Patrick. Okay, so as far as replays go, we will have at least, so this whole video that you're watching right now, this live stream, will be on YouTube in its entirety immediately. Then there will be individual sessions will be segmented out, possibly with Q&A tagged on if there was Q&A. If not, it'll at least be the individual sessions. And we plan to have a blog post follow-up that have downloads with it. If not, you can contact the individual presenters for the details and you get it from them.
My sessions are all got replay. Well, they will have replays when they're available, but all the slides and the commentary is available on the main blog.
Embarcadero. The file used to create database. So I believe Holger specifically said he cannot share the file he used to make the database, but he provides.
Oh, I wrote down his link. Hang on. Let me just.
It has to do with the redistribution. So he can't redisplay that to you, but he has all the steps and the sources he used to make it.
Yeah. He also had a. Oh, I can't get to it now. He had a tiny URL for this long link and said go there, and that's where you can. Where is it? There you go. That was he had a long link that he'd shortened and said. Go to here, and that's where you can sign up for it and all the rest of it. So,
yeah, actually, if you put that in the chat, it'll be clickable for everybody too.
Okay, I'll do that as well. Yeah.
And I believe, he was referring to the stations database. Yeah, and I think that's the link for that. Okay.